On the third day of our honeymoon in Hawaii, my fiancée disappeared. I found her on the hotel security cameras. She went into a room one floor above. There was a do not disturb sign on the door. When I knocked, her ex opened it and said, "Oops." From inside, I heard her voice. "Who's there, honey?" I pushed past him and, "I am Owen Hale, and this is what happened on the third day of our honeymoon." Hawaii was supposed to slow everything down. That was the promise Lydia and I kept repeating to each other during the flight, during the drive from the airport, during the first night when the ocean noise pressed through the open balcony doors. We had survived a chaotic year of planning, family pressure, money conversations, and constant movement. The honeymoon was meant to be a pause, not a test. The hotel sat directly on the beach, tall and quiet, built to make people feel small in a comforting way. From the lobby, everything looked clean and intentional. Soft lighting, staff that moved with practiced calm, guests who spoke quietly even when excited. It was the kind of place where nothing dramatic was supposed to happen. The first 2 days followed that script. We slept late, ate too much, walked along the shore without phones, and let the sun do most of the talking. Lydia smiled easily during those days, but there were gaps in it. Small absences. She checked her phone more than she claimed to need to. She stepped away to take calls she said were from her sister. I noticed it, but I did not press. Newly married people are taught to avoid friction early, as if silence equals peace. On the morning of the third day, Lydia told me she booked a spa appointment. She said it casually while tying her hair, already half turned toward the bathroom mirror. The appointment was late morning. She suggested I sleep in and meet her afterward for lunch. There was nothing strange in the words themselves, but something in the delivery felt rushed, as if she needed the plan to be accepted quickly. I stayed in bed longer than usual. The ocean was loud that morning, louder than the previous days, as if the weather had shifted slightly offshore. When I finally checked the time, it was already past noon. I showered, dressed, and waited. Lunch came and went without a message. I told myself she was enjoying herself. That was the point of a spa. By 2 o'clock, I started calling. The calls rang until they stopped. No message followed. I texted once, then again. Nothing arrived in return. I walked down to the spa desk, still relaxed enough to assume a scheduling mistake. The attendant checked the system twice and then apologized. Lydia had never checked in. That was the first moment the day tilted. I returned to the room and waited again, trying to keep the situation contained inside my head. I told myself she might have gone shopping, or met someone from the resort, or decided to extend her appointment and forgot to tell me. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the balcony door until my thoughts slowed enough to be manageable. By 4 o'clock, manageability disappeared. Her phone no longer rang. It went straight to voicemail. I walked back down to the front desk, this time less patient. The staff listened carefully, which is never comforting. They offered to call her room phone. It rang unanswered. They suggested waiting a little longer. I declined. I asked whether security could help locate her. I expected resistance. Instead, I received a nod and a quiet request to follow them to a small office behind the lobby. The security room was colder than the rest of the hotel. Monitors lined one wall, each showing a different angle of the property. A man in a blazer asked for Lydia's full name and room number. He typed without commentary. I told him I believed she had gone to the spa earlier that day. He nodded again, the way people do when they already know the answer will be disappointing. The footage did not take long to find. I watched Lydia appear on the screen shortly after 11 that morning. She entered the elevator alone, wearing the dress she had worn to breakfast. She did not press the button for the spa level. She selected a higher floor. When the doors opened, she stepped out with purpose. There was no hesitation in her walk, no searching glance down the hallway. She moved as someone who knew exactly where she was going. The camera angle changed. I saw her stop in front of a door. I saw her reach into her bag. I saw her hang a do not disturb sign on the handle before knocking. The room number appeared clearly in the corner of the screen. One floor above ours. I did not ask questions. I did not thank anyone. I left the security office with the image still burning behind my eyes. The elevator ride felt longer than physics should allow. When the doors opened, the hallway looked identical to ours below, only quieter. I found the room quickly. The do not disturb sign was still there. I knocked. The door opened partway. A man stood there barefoot, shirtless, holding the edge of the door as if the rest of the room belonged to him. I recognized him instantly. Scott Wilder, Lydia's ex, a name that had surfaced often enough in old stories to leave an imprint, but not often enough to feel present. He smiled, confused rather than alarmed. He said a single word, almost amused. Oops. From inside the room, Lydia's voice followed, warm and distracted, asking who was there. The sound of it landed harder than the sight of him. I pushed past Scott without permission. The room smelled like perfume and the hotel's soap. Lydia was on the bed, half covered, entirely unhurried. She looked up and saw me. Her expression did not change quickly. There was no immediate fear, only surprise, followed by something closer to annoyance. For a second, everything stayed still. The air, the bodies, the meaning of the moment. Then Scott began speaking, hands raised slightly, as if the situation were negotiable. Lydia shifted, pulling a sheet toward herself, eyes moving between us as if calculating. I did not shout. I did not threaten. I turned and walked out of the room. Behind me, voices rose. A door slammed. Another opened. The hallway filled with sound. Someone called security. I returned to our room and sat on the bed, still dressed, still wearing the same expression I had worn while watching the footage. The phone rang minutes later. The hotel asked me to remain available. When security arrived, they did not ask what happened. They already knew. They asked if I needed medical assistance. I said no. They asked whether I wanted to file a formal complaint. I said yes. They explained the process calmly. Incident reports, statements, footage, guest separation. I listened and agreed to everything without interruption. Later that evening, as the sun lowered and the beach filled with shadows, Lydia attempted to come back to the room. Security stopped her. She argued. I did not open the door. I stayed inside and packed slowly. Not because I was leaving immediately, but because movement was the only thing keeping the day from collapsing inward. That night, I did not sleep. I watched the ceiling fan turn and thought about how deliberate the morning had been. The elevator choice, the room number, the sign on the door. This was not confusion. This was planning. And this was only the beginning. Morning arrived without rest. The light slipped through the curtains in thin, deliberate lines, as if the day itself were cautious about entering the room. I had not slept. I had not even laid down. The bed remained untouched, a neat rectangle of white that no longer felt like mine. Everything I owned was still there, but ownership had already started to feel theoretical. The phone on the nightstand vibrated repeatedly before sunrise. I did not check it. I already knew who it was. The hotel room phone rang shortly after. I let it ring until it stopped. Silence returned, but it was no longer empty. It carried weight now. At 8, security knocked. They asked if I was ready to give a formal statement. I said yes. They escorted me back to the same office behind the lobby, the same cold room with the same wall of screens. This time, there were more people present. A manager, a senior security supervisor, someone from guest relations who looked uncomfortable holding a tablet. They explained the situation carefully. The incident from the previous evening had triggered mandatory reporting due to guest safety protocols and misuse of hotel access. The footage from the cameras had already been archived. Staff statements had been collected overnight. Noise complaints from nearby rooms had added witnesses. They asked me to describe what I saw when I entered the room upstairs. I did not embellish. I did not soften. I spoke in complete sentences, in chronological order, the way people do when they want to be believed without argument. When I finished, the manager nodded slowly and said they would now need to speak with Lydia and the other guests separately. Lydia had not slept in our room. She had been placed in a different part of the hotel, escorted by staff, her access to certain areas temporarily restricted. Scott had been moved as well. Not together. The hotel was very clear about that. I returned to the lobby afterward and sat in a chair near the windows. The ocean looked unchanged, indifferent to everything that had unfolded within walking distance of its waves. Guests passed by with towels and coffee cups, unaware that a collapse was happening in the same building. Lydia found me there. She approached slowly, as if speed might make things worse. Her hair was tied back. Her face looked different in daylight. Not guilty, not ashamed, but alert, like someone preparing to negotiate. She sat down across from me without asking. She started talking immediately. She said the situation was complicated. She said Scott had reached out weeks before the wedding. She said it started as closure. She said emotions resurfaced unexpectedly. She said Hawaii had intensified everything. She said nothing physical was supposed to happen. I did not interrupt. I did not nod. I did not react at all. When she realized that explanation alone was not changing anything, her tone shifted. She talked about timing. She talked about how visible this could become if mishandled. She talked about embarrassment. She talked about how families would react. That was when I stood up. I told her that hotel management already had the footage. I told her there were staff statements. I told her guests had heard the confrontation. I told her this was no longer a private matter, and it would not return to being one. Her expression changed then. Not panic. Calculation. She asked what I wanted. I told her I wanted distance. I told her communication would go through written channels only. I told her she would not be returning to our room. Security arrived moments later, as if on cue. They asked Lydia to accompany them. She resisted verbally, but complied physically. People noticed. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Scott appeared shortly after, escorted from the opposite direction. He looked less composed in daylight. He attempted to speak to me as he passed. Security cut him off. The lobby grew quieter in the way rooms do when everyone pretends not to watch something unfolding in front of them. Hotel management called me back into the office again. This time, the tone was firmer. They explained that Scott had used a room booked under a corporate travel account. The reservation did not align with his stated purpose for travel. That alone triggered internal review on their end. They also explained that Lydia had requested staff assistance earlier in the week to avoid being seen by certain guests. That request had been logged. Combined with the footage, it suggested intent rather than coincidence. They asked if I wanted copies of the documentation once the report was finalized. I said yes. By midday, word had reached Lydia's parents. Her mother called me first. She spoke quickly, asking what had happened, asking whether there had been a misunderstanding, asking whether the situation could be resolved quietly. I told her the truth, in the same tone I had used with security. She went silent. Then she asked for proof. I told her the hotel had it. Her father called later. His voice was slower, heavier. He did not ask questions. He said he would speak to Lydia himself. The hotel offered to comp my stay if I wanted to leave early. I declined. I wanted the record clean. I wanted the sequence intact. That afternoon, Lydia attempted to approach me again, this time near the elevators. Security intercepted her before she reached speaking distance. She raised her voice. She said my name loudly enough for others to hear. I did not turn around. Later, I learned that Scott had been questioned by hotel management regarding his reservation. He admitted that his employer had covered part of the trip. He admitted that he had not disclosed the personal nature of the travel. That admission alone placed his job in jeopardy. By evening, the hotel issued a formal notice. Lydia and Scott were both instructed to check out the following morning. Not together. Not quietly. Their accounts would be settled separately. Incident reports would be forwarded if requested. I returned to the room one last time and finished packing. I placed the ring Lydia had worn back into its box and left it on the desk. Not as a message, as an object returning to storage. That night, I ate alone at the restaurant we had planned to visit together. The staff treated me carefully, respectfully, the way people do when something has gone wrong and they know it. Outside, the ocean continued its rhythm. As I returned to my room, my phone buzzed again. A new number this time. Scott. I did not answer. I turned the phone face down and sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the sounds of the hotel settling into night. The situation had already moved beyond apology. It had entered a phase where structures responded. Policies, records, consequences. And I knew, with complete clarity, that what happened in that room upstairs was no longer the center of the story. It was the trigger. The morning Lydia and Scott were required to leave the hotel unfolded with quiet efficiency. There was no shouting in the hallways, no dramatic scenes by the elevators. The hotel handled it the way institutions always do when protecting themselves, through process, documentation, and distance. By the time I came down for breakfast, both of them were already gone. I asked for copies of everything. The manager explained that some documents would require a formal request, but that I would receive summaries immediately. Incident timelines, security footage timestamps, staff statements, guest complaints. All of it existed now as part of a permanent file. The event was no longer something that lived only in memory. It had become a record. That mattered more than emotion. I sat in the lobby again, laptop open, coffee untouched, waiting for the first email to arrive. When it did, it was exactly as expected. Neutral language, precise phrasing, a sequence of events that mirrored my own experience closely enough to remove doubt. Lydia had entered the elevator alone. Lydia had proceeded to the room. Lydia had placed the do not disturb sign. Scott had opened the door. Security had been contacted. Guest separation had occurred. There was no space in the report for interpretation. By midday, Scott's employer reached out. They did not contact me directly at first. They contacted the hotel, requesting verification related to a corporate expense submission. That request triggered a formal inquiry. The hotel shared documentation. The footage showed Scott arriving with luggage that did not match a business stay. The room booking details contradicted the stated purpose of his trip. When Scott realized the review had begun, he contacted me. He called twice. I did not answer. He sent a message explaining that he had not known how serious things would become. He claimed he believed Lydia and I were already struggling. He suggested mutual silence would benefit everyone. I forwarded the message to my attorney. That afternoon, Lydia's parents requested a call. I agreed, on speaker, with notes in front of me. They had already received partial information from the hotel. They had also spoken to Lydia. Their tone was controlled, but strained. They asked whether reconciliation was possible. They asked whether there had been any misunderstanding. I told them there was no misunderstanding. I explained the timeline. I explained the footage. I explained the planning involved. I explained that the marriage existed legally but had ended functionally the moment Lydia placed that sign on the door. They did not argue. Instead, they asked about finances. I explained that the wedding expenses had been paid from a joint account. I explained that I had covered the venue, travel arrangements, and deposits under my name. I explained that cancellations had already been initiated and that penalties would apply. I explained that responsibility would be determined based on documentation. The call ended without resolution. The hotel stay concluded the following day. I checked out without ceremony. The staff wished me well in the careful way people do when they know better than to say more. Outside, the sun looked the same as it had the week before. The airport was full of travelers beginning their own stories, unaware of the one that had ended nearby. On the flight home, I organized files. Emails from the hotel, screenshots of timestamps, copies of statements, messages from Scott, messages from Lydia that had arrived late and carried no substance. Everything went into folders labeled by date and relevance. This was not preparation for confrontation. This was preparation for clarity. Back home, the apartment felt unfamiliar. Lydia's belongings were still there. Shoes by the door, toiletries in the bathroom. I boxed them without hesitation and scheduled a courier pickup. There was no dramatic purge, only removal. 2 days later, Scott's employer contacted me directly. They asked whether I would be willing to confirm the authenticity of the hotel documentation. I said yes. They asked whether I had reason to believe the trip had been misrepresented for reimbursement. I said the footage showed personal use. They thanked me for my time. Scott was suspended that afternoon. Lydia called that evening. Her voice sounded different than it had in the lobby. Lower, less certain. She asked whether there was still a way to keep things private. She asked whether I planned to tell people. She asked whether we could delay legal steps. I told her the process was already moving. I told her the hotel report existed. I told her Scott's employer was involved. I told her our families had been informed. I told her there would be no public announcement from me, but also no protection from consequences. She accused me of wanting to punish her. I told her punishment implied intent. This was outcome. The following week, Scott was terminated. The official reason cited misuse of company resources and misrepresentation of travel purpose. The termination letter referenced an external incident report. He attempted to appeal. The appeal failed. That same week, Lydia's workplace began asking questions. Someone had recognized her name in connection with Scott's dismissal. Someone had mentioned the hotel incident. Lydia requested leave. Her request was denied pending review. She resigned 2 days later. I did not contact her employer. I did not need to. By the end of the month, the financial consequences became unavoidable. The wedding venue applied cancellation penalties. The caterer followed. The photographer charged partial fees. Each invoice referenced contract terms signed months earlier. Each balance landed squarely where the documentation pointed. Lydia's parents covered part of the cost initially. Then they stopped. They contacted me once more to ask whether I would consider sharing responsibility. I declined. I shared copies of the hotel report instead. Legal separation moved quickly. The paperwork was clean. No disputes over assets. No arguments about timelines. Lydia's attorney attempted to frame the situation as mutual breakdown. My attorney presented the sequence of events. The distinction mattered. When the judgment was finalized, responsibility for debts associated with the canceled wedding fell entirely on Lydia. She sent one final message afterward. It was long. It referenced stress. It referenced confusion. It referenced how quickly things had spiraled. It asked whether I felt any responsibility for what had happened next. I did not reply. The last update came months later, indirectly. Scott relocated after failing to secure similar employment. Lydia moved out of the city. Her social circle fractured under the weight of explanation. People chose distance over involvement. I did not follow their paths. The story had completed its transition. What began as a disappearance on the third day of a honeymoon had become something else entirely. A sequence of actions recorded, processed, and resolved by systems that did not care about emotion. And in that indifference, the truth held its shape. The final phase did not arrive with noise. It arrived the way real endings usually do, quietly, through paperwork, silence, and the slow disappearance of options. By the time the legal separation was complete, the narrative had stopped belonging to any one person. It existed independently now, carried by records, decisions, and outcomes that no longer required interpretation. What had happened in Hawaii was no longer a story people debated. It was a sequence of facts. I moved apartments 2 weeks after the judgment, not because I needed distance from memories, but because practicality demanded it. The old place had been chosen together, furnished together, discussed in terms of future plans that no longer existed. Starting elsewhere was not symbolic. It was efficient. The new place was smaller, closer to work, easier to maintain. I bought only what I needed. A bed, a desk, a table. Ownership felt different this time, stripped of shared meaning. Objects were just objects again. Lydia attempted contact once more through her attorney. The message was procedural, not emotional. She requested an extension on one of the payment schedules tied to the canceled wedding expenses. The request included explanations about job loss, relocation, and financial strain. My attorney responded with the existing court-approved terms. The extension was denied. Scott attempted contact again as well, this time indirectly. A mutual acquaintance reached out to ask whether I would consider clarifying that Lydia had played an equal role in what happened. The implication was obvious. He wanted mitigation, something he could use. I declined to engage. Scott's professional decline accelerated after his termination. Background checks surfaced the reason for his dismissal. Interviews ended early. Recruiters stopped responding. He accepted short-term contract work unrelated to his prior career path, then lost that as well. His relocation was not strategic. It was necessary. Lydia's situation followed a similar trajectory, though less visible. Her resignation left a gap on her resume that she struggled to explain convincingly. The hotel incident had spread just enough within her professional network to raise questions without requiring confirmation. Silence did not help her. Neither did explanation. She moved in with a relative temporarily, then into a shared rental outside the city. Her social presence diminished. Invitations stopped. Conversations shortened. People were not cruel. They were distant, which was worse. Months passed. I did not track her life, but information surfaced anyway. That is how consequences work. They do not need an audience, but they leave traces. A delayed payment notice forwarded to the wrong email. A mutual friend mentioning concern and then changing the subject. A public record filing that required no effort to find. At no point did I feel compelled to intervene. The idea that silence equals forgiveness is one people repeat to feel better about waiting things out. Silence, in reality, often means the matter has moved beyond discussion. The hotel reached out once more near the end of the year. They informed me that the incident had been used internally as a case study for guest access misuse and security protocol refinement. They thanked me for my cooperation and offered a standing accommodation credit should I choose to return in the future. I declined the credit. The place no longer held relevance. On the anniversary of what would have been our first year married, Lydia sent a message from a new number. It did not ask for reconciliation. It did not ask for money. It did not ask for help. It asked whether I believed she deserved everything that had happened afterward. I read the message once and closed it. Deserve is a word people use when they want to shift focus from cause to fairness. Systems do not operate on deserve. They operate on action and result. Later that year, I was asked to provide a brief statement for a deposition related to Scott's failed appeal against his former employer. The request came through official channels. The statement required no opinion, only confirmation of facts already documented. I provided it. The appeal was denied. That was the last formal interaction I had with any part of the situation. Life did not improve dramatically afterward. It stabilized. That was enough. Work continued. Friendships adjusted. Trust rebuilt itself slowly, not toward another person, but toward structure, toward predictability, toward the understanding that clarity is often more valuable than hope. I traveled again, eventually, not to Hawaii, somewhere colder, quieter, less performative. I stayed in places where anonymity was easy and expectations were minimal. No one knew my history. No one needed to. Occasionally, someone would ask whether I regretted how things unfolded. The question usually came from people who had heard fragments, not the whole sequence. I answered honestly. I regretted assumptions. I regretted ignoring early signals. I regretted believing proximity equaled loyalty. I did not regret walking away. The final consequence was not financial, legal, or social. It was the permanence of understanding. What Lydia did was not a moment of weakness or confusion amplified by circumstance. It was a decision executed with preparation, discretion, and intent. Once that became clear, the rest followed naturally. There was no need for revenge. No need for public spectacle. No need for dramatic closure. The systems handled it. The hotel recorded it. The employers responded to it. The courts resolved it. The social structures reacted to it. And when those systems finished their work, what remained was simple. I continued forward without carrying what did not belong to me. That was the consequence.